you have to become the person of interest at whatever it is that you do. So it doesn't matter what it is. That's why you see when people become realtors for the first time, they always post on Facebook, they message all their friends and family. But you have to let everybody know exactly what it is that you do. My name is Ryan. I'm a real estate investor. I'm a CPA. I help real estate investors save money on taxes. Like, you have to just continuously remind the entire world what it is that you do, and you have to become a person of interest at it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the newly branded Rare Mind podcast with Julian Castle. Today, I got Ryan Bakke. He's a CPA based out of Chicago, Illinois, and he is going to be talking about how he has built a personal brand, built a $3 million real estate portfolio that cash flows $18,000 a month. He has done $3 million in revenue in the past year in a CPA firm, and is going to do $5 million. And we're just going to get into some strategies, some personal brand building, and some real estate tips, from Ryan. So, Ryan, how you doing?
It's awesome to be on here. Thank you so much.
Cool, man. So, Ryan, how'd you get started in this game? What was the initial moment for you where you were like, okay, well, I kind of want to go down this path?
Yeah, it all started. I went to school for accounting and finance. I fell in love with accounting as like the language of business. I had a couple of good professors that were always talking a lot about real estate. And actually, the first CPA firm that I ever worked for, I prepared 2 tax returns one day. And one tax return was a married couple. They were making $200K W-2. And another tax return was a single guy from Chicago who had 18 apartment buildings in the city of Chicago. And he was making $400,000 a year in cash flow off of those apartment buildings. So he was making double what the married couple was. And so he was single, which means he's in a higher tax bracket, and he was making double the amount of money. But when I was preparing his return, he paid less in taxes than the married couple did. And I remember thinking to myself that I was going to get fired or I did something wrong. And I remember bringing it to my boss. He goes, no, it's because he invests in real estate. It's because he invests in real estate. He's a full-time real estate investor. And I've spent the last 10 years of my life figuring out exactly how real estate investors can pay little to nothing in taxes. And so I went down that career path. As far as public speaking and kind of building a brand, that all started, I was teaching Dave Ramsey's personal finance class at my church, believe it or not. And this was before COVID. Oh, wow. So I was teaching that class since I was 19 or 20 years old. And then all of a sudden COVID happened. And I went to a really small church, so they didn't have the bandwidth to switch everything over to online. And I sort of lost a sense of fitting in and belonging, because I had 12 to 15 people coming to see me every Sunday looking up to me to give them advice, and I wasn't getting that anymore because of COVID. We weren't doing it online. So I started posting on Instagram. Like, I started taking videos of myself teaching people personal finance, teaching them tax strategies, and I fell in love with that. Probably about a year and a half later from my first post is when I left. I used to work at Deloitte Consulting in their tax strategy department. I left my job at Deloitte to help real estate investors, pretty much full-time, help real estate investors save money on taxes, and I've been doing it full-time for 3 years now, a little over 3 years.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Well, congrats on your journey. So a lot of people, when they're getting into real estate, when we think about someone that actually wants to become wealthy, they talk about, like, you got to do estate planning, you got to get trusts, you want to do all this. What is your what would you say is the starter strategy for someone who's actually really going to get committed into real estate? What should they do in order to set themselves up for success later without having to restructure every stuff that they did earlier on before?
Yeah, you want to definitely find your what's the one thing that you're top 10% at in the world at doing? Whether that's writing effectively, communicating, sales, is it math, is it numbers? Like, what's the one thing that you can do that anybody else can't? I tell people all the time, I don't want to be the best. I want to be the only person that can do what it is that I do. Because, you can find a CPA that might know the tax code and they can file a good tax return. But, can you find a CPA that is also a dedicated real estate investor themselves and that are looking just above and beyond the tax strategies to say, hey, you can do this, but you're really going to screw yourself up from a lending perspective because you're going to max out your DTI. Or, you can hold that property with that LLC structure, but now you're going to have to file an extra business tax return that you may not have seen coming. And so I think what I can help people do is see beyond, ask a few layers of why. One of the things, I was reading Elon Musk's book, and he was mentioning how he'll ask why 6 times before he accepts an answer. Why did we build it this way? Oh, this, sir. Oh, why? Oh, because of this, and that, sir. Oh, why? Like he'll ask the question why 6 times. And it's the same thing that we do with our clients. It's, I don't want to just give you a parachute. I want to give you a backup parachute too. And not only do I want to help you out on the tax side of things, but I also want to help you out on the legal, the lending, and then the estate planning stuff. So for me personally, I recommend like the holding company structure, very similar to how other attorneys would. And then I think at a certain point, I normally say if you're single and you have a $2 million net worth or more, I think that's where you throw a revocable living trust at the top onto it. But the trust doesn't own anything, remember. The trust is going to own your holding company that owns the LLCs in the states where the properties are located at, right? $3 million net worth maybe if you have kids. But I'll tell you the reason why you do trusts. And it's because trusts are more of a escaping the government's pockets and lawyers' pockets than they are tax avoidance. See, when people pass away in most states, the state gets to decide what happens to their assets, and we call it probate. And so I have probably the best example of this was it happened to my family where my step-grandpa, he had 3 kids in his first marriage. And then he had my mom and my uncle in his second marriage. And my uncle had a will in the state of Florida. He didn't have a pot to piss in, let's be honest. He had a $150,000 house and some couple assets, maybe a $250,000 estate. And his will, in the state of Florida, wills have to be notarized and witnessed by at least 2 different people. And the notary that came to do his will at his house didn't know that. And so when he passed away and the will was presented to the courts, they declared the will null and void. And in my grandpa's will, he wanted all of his stuff to go to my mom and my uncle, 50-50. But in the state of Florida, if you die what's called intestate, meaning you don't have a will and you don't have a trust, the state gets to decide what happens to your assets. In the state of Florida, it says that all your assets go to your beneficiaries or your descendants evenly. So he's got 5 kids, 3 of which he hasn't talked to in 20 years, that get a share of those assets. Had he have had a revocable living trust, the trustee goes to the courthouse, goes to the state, and says, "Here's exactly what I'm ordered to do by this written contract for this person's estate. This person gets this person gets that," and then it's done. It's literally done within a year, versus this event happened 3 or 4 years ago, and we're still trying to clear up probate. By the time my mom actually gets all the money, she's going to pay more in lawyer fees than what she actually gets her share of the house.
That's insane. I can't believe how lawyers, they just take advantage, just this whole thing just to drag it out. It's crazy. But yeah, so you recommend a holding company and then an irrevocable trust if you're higher than a $2 million net worth, and then that way, you don't have to be liable for anything, and any slips and falls, they can't sue you personally because you have no assets. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's a revocable living trust, revocable, not irrevocable. Oh, revocable. Don't want to get those two confused. One of them, the revocable one you're going to have while you're living. As soon as you pass away, then it converts into an irrevocable trust, basically meaning that the person has no control because the person doesn't live anymore, typically when they pass away. The whole point of asset protection and having like a good structure, and this is something that we work with our tax strategy clients to help put together, is you just want to make it as hard as possible for people to come after you. So when you think of just a regular approach of like, here I am and I own a house. Well, on the county website, it shows who owns the house. It's my first name, Ryan Bakke, right? Well, I need some separation there. But it's not enough to just own an LLC in the state of Illinois, because most states report the ownership interest of their members. So if I have an Illinois LLC that owns the property, somebody can go on the Secretary of State website of Illinois and figure out that Ryan owns that LLC, and then ultimately Ryan owns the property. If I have a Wyoming holding company that sits on top of the Illinois LLC, when they go to Wyoming's website, Wyoming doesn't disclose the interests of its members. Okay. And I'm just making it as hard as possible for people to come after me, because you have to remember, attorneys, especially in personal injury, they work off contingency. So they don't get paid unless they settle a case. And if they see me, who has a complex asset protection structure, I'm making it as hard as possible for them to find out who I am and come after me. They're not going to want to come against me. They're going to want to settle with my insurance company. Versus if, we see this all the time, like a doctor who's making $500,000 a year, has a high net worth. They don't know any better. They just own a property in their personal name. God forbid somebody slips and falls on that property and that lawyer finds out that you're a doctor. They're going to take you for everything that you have. Everything. And
wow.
And so that's why you set up that structure that way. Yeah.
That's scary. So yeah. All right. So I'm glad we got this out the way. So that's the starter pack to do and use. Now, taxes is really a lot of people's main number one primary expense.
It is.
So what is some of the things that you recommend for someone who is possibly earning a high W-2 income but is not really getting a lot of tax deductions or something? What can they do with real estate or with your tax strategies to minimize that?
Yeah, the first thing is I always like to recommend strategies to clients that boost their net worth over time. A lot of people out there will, tell you to write off a Mercedes or a G-Wagon or a nice car, but you and I both know 5 years from now, like, your net worth is going to go down by owning that car. I like to recommend strategies that 5 years from now, not only did you save a bunch of money in taxes, but your net worth is also liable to go up, or it's more than likely probable that it goes up, right? Not all the time, because, things like retirement accounts, real estate, those tax saving strategies, they don't always go up, but generally, over a long enough time horizon, they do. And I think that's important to talk about is a lot of people want to get rich way too quick and think that it can happen super fast. And, there's a good quote about this. It's like people underestimate what they can do or people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. Because we like to think years for some reason. And I don't really think you should set 12-month goals, but really like 18-month goals are more realistic because it's a longer time frame. A year is too short, I think, in my opinion. 18 months is like an ideal setting for a goal. When you look at the stock market, though, the stock market or real estate in general, it's shifting reward from people who are willing to take good calculated risk to people who are not taking any risk at all or are taking the wrong risk, right? So there's a guy that's got $100,000 in cash that's sitting under his mattress. There's a guy that's got $100,000 in the duplex that's down the street, right? Is one smarter than the other? Time will tell. But I will know that the guy that's got it in the duplex, he's saving money on taxes. He's going to get appreciation. He's going to get cash flow. And 5 years from now, his $100,000 that he put into the property is more likely going to be worth more than the guy that just keeps it in the mattress. The market doesn't reward overly risky behavior. Okay? It doesn't reward speculative risk. It doesn't reward people who are risky, super risky. It doesn't reward people who are overly safe either, which I want to make this point very clear. It rewards the right amount of risk at the right time. And so we like to put forth those strategies. I'm a really big fan of 401ks, health savings accounts, whatever you can clean up with your W-2 job, if that's something you're doing. I like to use those to the full advantage. We do a lot of real estate. I think real estate's, if you ask anybody, the number one tax saving strategy is probably real estate, because I go back to the example all the time of the guy who made $400,000 in real estate on 18 apartment buildings. He didn't pay anything in taxes, right? Because he owned real estate, which is passive, which means you're at a lower tax rate, and you can offset it by a host of other exclusions like interest expense, depreciation, mortgage insurance, things like that. And so the first step, I think, would be maximizing those pre-tax accounts like a 401k or an HSA, and then getting into real estate or some type of passive investment. Passive investments don't just have to be real estate. It could be a business that you own that you don't have a say in. So like you could own part of my CPA firm if you wanted to, if you gave me enough money. You could own part of it. and you wouldn't have any say in the business from a day-to-day perspective, that would be a passive activity to you. And if it's passive to you, that means you can offset it with what? Other passive losses. So if you have losses coming from real estate and you have a business, it could be any business, as long as it's passive to you, those will offset each other. So like I have a friend that him and I both invest in each other's CPA firms. And so that's kicking off like a 6-figure income to me. I can offset that income with my rental losses because of the way that the business is structured. Right. We have clients that were friends before they come to us. We're like, why aren't you guys investing in each other's offices? You invest in his, give him a loan, or you invest equity in his business, he invests equity in your business, and you're able to write off that stream of income if you have some rental losses sitting around. We get clients all the time that come to us that have tons of trapped losses, like tons of unused losses, and then we can recommend them strategies on how to tap into those losses. Because it doesn't do you any good to keep losses on your tax return. It's kind of like those commercials you ever see, it's my money and I need it now. Have you ever seen those commercials?
Yeah.
Like if you have losses, like if the government owes you money, you want to take it as quick as possible. Because the longer you wait, the less it's actually earning for you. And time value of money says, well, if I can get $30,000 now, why would I not get it now? Why would I wait 3, 4, 5 years to get it? I want it right now.
Right. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's interesting. That's very creative the way you can do that to offset your passive losses with other passive income. What I want to talk about is, as you're dealing with all these clients, you said you bought another company out in LA. You have now 800 clients or more. Obviously, you see the patterns of real estate investors because you only work with real estate investors, right?
Mm.
And so I want to see if you can talk about some of the things that you see that are right within the clients that you service for the people that are listening, so that you can see what they can do, give them some advice.
Sure, I definitely. So I actually did a podcast on some of the lessons that I learned from some of the clients, and let me see if I can get it to you. So the first lesson that I learned is people who are extremely wealthy, they act with an extreme sense of urgency. They understand that time is of the essence, and that the person that can move the fastest, not moving with haste, but like quick to act, fast to reply to the phone, fast to reply to emails, like that move with a sense of urgency. Because there's nothing that I hate. Like, you ever go to a grocery store and you're trying to check out really quick, and the person in front of you, they only got like 3 items, and they're like fumbling their purse or their wallet trying to find their money. It's like so frustrating, dude. I have my Apple Watch. I don't have it on me. I go up to the thing, hit the button, swipe, and I'm out, gone. And I could tell right away how much money you have by how quick you're in and out of the grocery store. Do you act with a sense of urgency or not? Like, because I want, not that I'm rushing people, but I just move faster than the average person. And that's one of the things that I noticed across a lot of these wealthy clients, $5 million, $10 million net worth and up, is all of them act with an extreme sense of urgency to just get shit done, point blank, right? Mm-hmm. If I could share a couple of other things, they did one thing really well, okay? And it goes back to something I talk about, like, you only invest in what you know and understand. If you don't understand it, or if it smells fishy, or if something's out of whack, and you just can't put your finger on it, that's your gut reaction. That's your instinct telling you. And it goes back to something that I call voices of 10,000 generations. So our intuition and our gut feeling is the sum of our previous experiences as well as our ancestors' previous experiences. Okay? So all those knowledge and all those lessons, like why you can't put your hand on a stove, and if you hear a bus coming, you back away, like all that stuff is based on like our ancestors, whether it's like our straight up descendants or like the people before us. But everything is learned through history. Like, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes a lot. And so these wealthy people, they did one thing extremely well, whether that was like start a concrete company and, sold concrete. I knew a guy, I got invited to I was in Vegas actually, and I got invited to the Raiders suite. and I got invited to like this nice suite. There was a couple like executives and some higher up people there, and I noticed this guy. He was like in proper attire, but he had a janitor uniform on, and his like name tag was Jeff, but he wasn't the janitor though. Like he was sitting up there with the owners, right? And so I was like asking him, I'm like, because everybody's in like nice suits and dressed up nice, and here's this guy in a janitor suit. I'm like, oh, nice to meet you. Like, what do you do? He goes, I'm a janitor. Like I've cleaned toilets and bathrooms my entire life. I go, oh, okay. And I just started talking to him. He goes, my company does all the janitorial work for all the NFL stadiums.
Oh, wow.
He goes, every single NFL stadium has a contract with me to do their cleaning, like out of the games. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, can I pick your brain a little bit? And he's like, yeah, the one thing that I did was I just did one thing really, really well, and word spread. And now I have the contract with all the NFL teams, and who knows how much money that guy's worth, right? So they do one thing really well. The guy cleans toilets for a living, right? The more you can simplify what you do in a single sentence, the more money you're going to make, because the easier people can understand. You know, instead of saying, I could say I help people save money on taxes. Easy, right? I fill out government forms for a living. Pretty easy. The more like complex you make it, the tougher it's going to be for you to make money. The other thing that I learned is wealthy people can argue both sides. They can argue both sides really well. And so I learned this from, I used to do debate in high school, like debate team. And one time our coach, he brought us into practice, and he's like, okay, you guys are going to argue about, you guys are going to be pro-Reaganomics back in the 70s and 80s with Reagan, the trickle-down economics, basically tax cuts for corporations, and it's going to trickle down to the average person, right? At least that's what they hoped. And then the other side's going to argue against it, okay? So you guys come back next week. So I come in prepared to argue why I think Reaganomics is going to work. And then when we get into class, he goes, okay, everybody's going to flip-flop now. Those that were going to argue for it are now arguing against it. Those who are arguing against it are going to now argue for it. And everybody's kind of upset and like up ears and really pissed off. And he goes, no, it's like you cannot argue your side without first knowing the counter argument side better than they do. That's how you really can argue something. Like if you're trying to decide whether or not to invest in a house, well, do you know the counter argument better than you, better than the for argument, right? Or vice versa. Like really wealthy people, they can argue both sides and be successful with it. And it kind of goes back into deal making. Like the person that's willing to walk away from the deal is going to be the person that's going to win. If you're ever rushed into a deal, you're probably not going to win because you're rushed. And whoever can argue both sides is likely going to win.
Wow, that's a gem. I love that.
The most important lesson that I learned from rich and wealthy people though is they understand standing on the shoulders of giants. So standing on the shoulders of giants is a reference to Isaac Newton's quote in the 1700s, and it basically says, if I could see past the next man, it's because I stood upon the shoulders of giants. And what that means is anybody that's achieved an amount of success in a relatively fast timeline has used somebody else's knowledge, power, wisdom to get there quicker. Because it's not a mistake that at 27, like I've done over $8 million in revenue, top line, right? That's not a mistake. I got there through the knowledge and power of other people. I stood on the shoulders of other giants, other marketing giants, other real estate giants, people who could do public speaking. I was reading one of Henry Ford's books. It was the last book that he wrote before he died. And in the book, he talks about, he mentions that Isaac Newton quote. And he talks about his mentor was Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison told Henry Ford, he goes, look, there's going to be 1,000 people that you meet. Only listen to 3 people. Because everybody else's opinion, for lack of a better term, is garbage. And you don't listen to them because they'll put the bad stuff in your head. Right? They'll plant the wrong ideas, right? They'll give you the wrong opinion that you shouldn't listen to. Find the 3 people and listen to everything that they absolutely say. Now, that was 3 out of 1,000 people 120 years ago. I think it's like 3 out of 10,000 people now with social media and influencers and things like that. But in the book, Henry Ford writes, if I would have listened to the opinions of other people, I would have built a faster horse instead of a car, right?
Yeah.
And so I think about that because it was 3 people that were telling Henry Ford you should build something different. It was 997 other people saying, oh, well, can we figure out how to make the horse faster? Like, should we feed it different food or water or make it drink salt or something like that? Like, and so who you surround yourself with and whose shoulders you stand on is extremely important, because mentors and those types of people can just propel you to get to where you want to be way, way quicker than you ever can imagine. Way quicker. And so now I'm blessed to be a part of some of these, high level masterminds, have some of them on my own. And, I probably will continue to spend 50 to 60 grand every year on continuing education. Not an MBA, not a degree from Harvard or Wharton, but a mastermind. The ability to be in the room with people that make over $1 million or more. That's the mastermind that I'm in.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I love it. I think I've heard the quote. It's a college education will make you a living. Self-education will make you a fortune. So I'm all for that. Yeah. And I think the people listening are too. So thank you for those tips. And on the one that you mentioned, the first one, which is the speed of urgency, I think that I've heard this before, which is like you understand how much a person is, in wealth when you see them order with a waiter. Usually they know what to order real quick. They don't waste time. It's like, they order for you and stuff. The people who wait, looking at the menu for the longest time is just, again, those people that are just don't have, like, they don't value time as much as you do, And so that's a big difference there.
It's not even that they just don't value their time. They don't value other people's time.
Right.
And that's the most important, because, it's one thing to have you waiting on other people, but to have other people waiting on you, I never want that. That's why our clients get 24 to 48 hour email response. And that's how we're able to, charge maybe 50% more than the guy down the street, because guy down the street takes 2 to 3 weeks to respond to an email. We take 2 to 3 hours sometimes to respond to an email. And it's just having that sense of urgency, especially when you're dealing with business and real estate folks. Like, deals happen quick. There's agents, showing homes on the weekend. I've actually probably, done more deals on the weekend than I've done during the week. It's just how it always ends up. Like, I closed the CPA firm, signed the contract on a Saturday. I was at a barbecue when the agreement came through. Like, the PSA came through, I was at a barbecue signing the damn thing. And it, another tip is, it, like I said, standing on the shoulders of giants, but it's also like who you surround yourself with. Because, like, a lot of people our age, there's only so many people that you can talk to that are your age that are doing incredible things that are our age. Like, I got two buddies that are my age that also make over $1 million a year. I'm talking net. I got 2 guys on my phone that are under 27 that make over $1 million a year. And we mastermind and we brainstorm frequently. We're actually in different industries too, which is kind of nice. We're not competing against each other.
Right.
Although,
yeah.
Right. And so, like, who you surround yourself with, because a flea in a 4-inch jar can only jump 4 inches, even though that they can jump 4 feet off the ground. When you put the flea in a bigger jar, he only jumps 4 inches because he doesn't know that he's able to jump higher than that. And you can hurt yourself by putting yourself in the wrong room and not in the right room with people that are going to make you jump higher. So you have to, if you're the smartest person in the room, if you're the one who makes the most amount of money in the room, you got to find another room to jump in, because you're not going to get smarter and you're not going to make any more money if that's the goal.
Yep, absolutely. That's so cool. I love talking about this. So I do want to talk about how you kind of like came up in your deals. You've done, I think, 15 deals. You told me a little more than that.
Yeah.
So I want to see if you can walk us through some of your deals to see how, they came about and what you do in real estate.
Yeah, I started off like most people with house hacking. So I learned about through Bigger Pockets and online about the ability to like cut your largest expense that most people have, which is their housing payment, which typically if somebody's balancing a good budget, it's normally anywhere from 25 to 40% of their monthly income. And at the time, my mortgage was when I bought my first duplex, which I could talk a lot about getting seller concessions to help cut down closing costs, trying to negotiate. I always tried to find a property that I know would appraise for a decent amount and try to put it under contract for a little bit lower. So in this particular deal, I thought it was going to appraise for about 250. It ended up coming back at 245, and I locked it up for 235. So I was under contract for 235. The bank appraised it at 245, and a rookie investor would just be like, okay, great, my net worth goes up 10 grand as soon as I buy it. But I found on Bigger Pockets that the better thing to do is to bump the purchase price up to whatever the bank will appraise it at, and split the difference with the seller. So I go to the seller and say, hey, I know I'm supposed to give you 235, okay? The bank appraisal just came back at 245. Can we bump up the purchase price to 245? And I'm going to give you an extra $5,000, but I want $5,000 towards my closing costs and down payment. And he said yes, of course, because he's going to get another $5,000 out of the deal, right? And so what's 3.5% of 230 or 235?
3.5% of 230?
Yeah, it's like $7-8 grand, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, I just got $5,000 towards my $8,000 down payment closing costs, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right? So I'm out of pocket like $3,000 on this house when it's all said and done. And then on top of that, I did a cost segregation study, which I know you talked about before. I did a cost segregation study on the portion that because remember I was living in one, renting out the other. Yep. I did a cost segregation study and saved $6,000 in taxes that year. This was 2021. And so I actually got paid when it was all said and done. I got paid $4 grand to buy the house because I only came out of pocket for $2 grand and I saved $6 grand in taxes. And so that's how I bought my first deal. I actually got paid to buy my first deal when you think about it. And the mortgage was $1,500 a month. I lived in one side. I rented out the other side for $1,100, and I was only spending $400 a month to live when all my friends are spending $1,600, $1,700 to live, right? And I was owning an asset too. Locked it in for a super low interest rate. The one mistake I made on that deal, which I hope nobody else does, is if you have a good credit score, like if your credit score is over 700, don't waste your time doing an FHA loan because number one, the fees are higher with FHA because the federal government's involved. Number two, the property has to pass FHA inspection, which are tough in some areas, and there's only a limited amount. Also, too, if it's a hot market and a realtor's going to their client and showing them all their offers, they got conventional offer, because a conventional offer doesn't know the difference if it's 5% conventional or 20% conventional. It just knows it's conventional. But when they slide your offer in at FHA, they're like, if they got 7 other offers, they're just going to cross yours off the list. Because history shows like FHA people are less likely to close than that of a conventional borrower, right? So there's tons of reasons why on the front end you would want to do conventional, put the 5% down. You could do 5% down owner occupied, right, on a duplex. There's tons of reasons why you would want to do that as opposed to putting 3.5%. But the biggest reason is when you get 20% of equity in a property and you want to refinance to drop the PMI, if you have an FHA loan, you have to do an actual appraisal and a refi, which I had 20% equity like 2 years in. But guess what? Interest rates by then went from 3% to 6.5%. So I literally, my payment would have gone up by 30-40% a month if I wanted to refi to drop the PMI. So it's still an FHA loan. Had I have done conventional and just ponied up and put the 5% down, as soon as you get 20% of equity with a conventional loan, they order an appraisal. You show the appraisal to the bank and they drop the PMI without having to do a refi. And I would have saved myself so much money, probably like $6,000 to date. Because if I would have refied back in 22, I would have saved, $200 a month for 3 years.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's great.
That was my first deal.
That's amazing. Can you educate us on you said the conventional. So you said mostly what people think when they think conventional is a 20% down payment. How come someone's able to go down to a 5% down payment?
Yeah, look at they just came out with something, and it was at the end of 2023, I think, that lets you put down 5% down, owner occupied up to 4 units. It's a new. It's one of the. It's either Fannie or Freddie. It's one of those loans, but you can do 5%. But it has to be owner occupied. That's the thing. I think if you're trying to do a traditional investment loan, yeah, I don't think you're going to get with anything cheaper than 15% down. You could do a secondary home loan if you're trying to do an Airbnb and get away with putting 10% down. But if you're going to put anything like a regular investment property where you don't own or occupy, you're going to have to put down minimum 15% in most cases if you're going to do a loan. So I hope that, yeah. And then from there, I actually bought 2 more properties from the same guy because I learned, he calls me maybe like 10, 14 days after closing. And he's like, hey, I have these other properties in the area. I'm moving everything to Tennessee. Like, I don't want, because I live in Chicago. He's like, I don't want to deal with them anymore. Do you, or anybody that wants to buy them? I'm like, dude, I want to buy them, but I just maxed out my debt to income. Because remember, I was making $60,000 a year at Deloitte. I just bought a $230,000 house, which is like 4 times my salary. The bank wouldn't give me any more loans, so I was maxed out. So I told him I was like, would you be interested in seller financing it to me? Which is crazy to think that he would do it at the time because the rates were so damn low, and the real estate was going like this. But I sat him down, and I had coffee with him 2 or 3 times, and then one lunch, and I explained to him. I said, look, you don't want to sell all 3 of these properties in 1 year because you're going to pay out the ass in taxes because you've owned these properties for so long. They've gone up in time. And so it's like he's probably going to end up getting – he would have got $800,000 or $900,000 for all 3 of them, okay? Because the other 2 that I bought were bigger, were 4 units, bigger properties. And I'm like, look, you don't want to sell them all in 1 year because your tax rate's going to go all the way through the roof. And then even if you do get the money – you're going to pay taxes and lose value to inflation because you're going to grab $1 million for these 3 properties. You're going to send 30% to Uncle Sam. Goodbye. Gone. Just like that. And then what are you going to do with the $700K that's sitting in the bank? You don't have time to invest in the stock market because you're already retired. What if it loses money, right? This was also right after the stock market took a 30% hit during COVID. So I had that as leverage to use against them. Right. I said, look, your best thing to do is to seller finance it to me at 5%. Guaranteed. And he did it.
Oof, let's go.
Right? Because I was able to explain to him, like, number 1, you're going to get fucked on taxes. Sorry for the language, by the way. Number 2, you don't want to, your best opportunity with that money, because you're going to get that $700K and you're going to sit on it in a bank account. And you're going to get paralysis analysis of what to do with the money. And then you're not going to get in the market. Because when I tell people it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. The people that spend the most amount of time in the market are going to make the most amount of money. And Fidelity did a study on this from 1990 to 2020, 30 years. The number 1 statistic of people who earn the most amount of money, the common denominator, dead people. Dead people had the highest return over 30 years. Why? Because they didn't touch anything. They set it and literally forget it. The second highest common denominator, people who forgot their password over 30 years, right? Those are the people who made the most amount of money in the stock market. And you're like, why? It's because they never touched it. They just set it and forget it. Because when you start to try to time the market, how do you know when it's high and how do you know when it's low? You don't. You are a human riding an elephant, my friend. And sure, you could try to think you can steer the elephant to do one way or the other, but if the elephant wants to go berserk on you, it's going to go berserk on you. You just have to be along for the ride. And that's what the stock market is. So you don't really try to time these things. You got to take the right amount of risk at the right time. That's why I normally recommend, investing a percentage of your income every month. Don't go invest $50,000 all at once. Go put in a little bit amount every single month until you've invested the $50,000.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's cool. Yeah, that's and it works with real estate too. The buy and hold people are the ones that are making all the or most of the money. So yeah. Now you got more deals. I mean, that was a great pitch for seller finance for those of you that are listening.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that was great and it worked. So so that's incredible. So
Go check out one of my podcasts if you're interested in that. I have a playbook on how to use seller financing from a buy side and a sell side. Really, if you can understand, because it comes down to those three things. Number one, taxes. Number two, it's they don't have enough time. In terms of like especially if they're older, they don't have time for it to sit in the market. Because what happens if it goes down, right? If they only have a 2 or 3 year investing time horizon, they're better off seller financing it to you than they are putting it in the stock market, because the stock market goes up and down too quickly, right? And then the third reason is it's their best opportunity. It's what they know and understand. Because in a lot of seller finance deals, if you as the buyer don't make a payment for a couple months, they just come and take back the house. And then they're dealing with those types of problems. So not to plug my own stuff, but I've done courses and boot camps and workshops. I've bought, dude, I think almost every deal I've done since has had some element of seller financing to it. This business that I just bought was on seller finance.
Yeah.
It's actually considered an earn-out, which is different than seller finance, by the way, if you're looking to buy businesses. Earn-outs are kind of like a seller finance note, except you'll never pay as much as you would if it was a seller finance note, because it's based on the performance, the future performance of the company. So,
right. So the earnouts is the seller gets paid an earnout fee for staying in or helping you with some of it, and then you obviously get paid. You pay him from some of the proceeds. Right?
Yeah. Let's say I have $1 million business, right, and it's going to sell for $1 million. Well, as a buyer, the way that I see it is the more money that I put down and or the more money that I personally guarantee with the SBA, it's shifting the risk from the seller to me and my ability to perform. Well, if I'm worried about client retention, I'm worried about employee retention, I'm worried about a lot of these factors that like I don't necessarily have super control over, I don't want to put as much money down and shift that risk onto me. I want it so that seller and buyer both have skin in the game and equal amount of risk. And so that's where the concept of an earnout comes in. Because if I just let's say I did $1 million seller finance loan at 5% for 4 years, I would have paid $50,000 a year in simple interest and then the $1 million on top of that. So I would have paid a total of $1.2 million for the business, right? But if I said, hey, what we're going to do is $1 million, there's going to be no purchase price, but the earnout is going to be based on 25% of gross revenue for 4 years, right? Which comes out to be $1 million if you do it over 4 years, but not really, because not 100% of clients are going to stay for 4 years. Does that make sense?
Right.
80%, 90% are going to stay the first year, 80% are going to stay the second year, 70 to 75% are going to stay the third year, and then 70% the fourth year. So that's what I'm saying. On an earnout structure, you'll never pay more for a business on an earnout structure than you will a seller finance loan. Because if I did a seller finance loan, I'm locked in. I'm paying $1,050,000. Earnout, I'm probably going to end up paying like $700,000, $800,000 for it over 4 years, by the way, too.
Nice, that's smart. Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some real estate tax strategies. I know. There's the Augusta rule, real estate professional status, just give us some of these that maybe, from your point of view, so that we can understand some of these from your, point.
What you have to see the tax code as being, and like filing tax returns, is not always seeing it as punishment, more so as seeing it as a roadmap to wealth, because they're telling you exactly what they want you to do in order to pay less in taxes. And the reason why it is the way it is because look who writes the tax code. It's Congress that writes the tax code, not the IRS. A lot of people are like, oh, the IRS writes the tax code. I do this pop quiz all the time for my on some of my webinars. So I'm like, who writes the tax code? Everybody's like the IRS. I'm like, no, it's Congress. When you look at who Congress is made up of, it's investors, business owners, and people who buy real estate, right? And so no wonder that they write the laws that favor those types of activities. Also, tell me why somebody can get elected to Congress, they have a $500,000 net worth. They get elected to Congress. They make $150,000 a year. And then, 20 years later, they have a $50 million net worth. Tell me how that makes sense. I don't know. But there's a lot of insider trading, insider things going on. But there's also like an insider part to the tax code too. Because if you understand how it's supposed to be played, you can maximize that. And one of those big advantages is the real estate professional status, where if let's say you're a realtor, you're full-time in real estate, you're in real estate construction, you're a broker, property manager, like anything that you buy, that you manage, you can use those losses that are generated from it to help offset your high active income. We have tons of clients that do it. Or you marry a real estate professional. So we have actually one of my largest clients is a former NFL quarterback, and now he's a TV anchor. If I told you his name or gave you a hint, you'd figure out who it was. But his wife he's full-time anchor for football, NFL. His wife is a real estate professional. She's a realtor. She sells homes, she probably sells 20 homes, 30 homes a year. But she qualifies as a real estate professional. So any real estate that they buy, they're able to offset his $1 million plus anchor income plus his NFL pension that he gets, and basically pay nothing in taxes. But the key word there is real estate professional, meaning like somebody in that household, whether it's you or your spouse, has to pretty much be full-time in real estate. If you're working a W-2 in tech or you're a CPA, you can't be a real estate professional because you have to spend most of your time in real estate. So if I'm spending 2,000 hours a year as a CPA, I'd have to spend 2,001 hours in real estate. They're not going to believe that. I might work 80 hours a week some weeks, but not all, 52 weeks, right? Or 50 weeks. And so that's why I think above real estate professional status is what's called the short-term rental loophole. Because the short-term rental loophole, and it's part of the reason why I like short-term rental properties more than buy and hold long-term rentals, because short-term rentals, I like being a host rather than a landlord, to be honest with you. Like I like people viewing me as like a host, like rather than a landlord. I don't know, it's kind of weird. They cash flow more. They're in more desirable locations. Yeah, like I was telling you, I have one in Hollywood, right? They cash flow more, and they provide more tax benefits. Because with short-term rentals, the short-term rental loophole allows you to be a tech worker. It allows you to be a CPA. It allows you to do any job full-time, own a short-term rental, and take the same exact benefits that you get as real estate professional status without having to be a real estate professional. You could be a full-time in anything, own a short-term rental, and use it to offset your high income. So, and we've already defended this under audit 3 times last year, the short-term rental loophole. I had the IRS were trying to come after almost $400,000 from 3 of my clients total. They got nothing because again, it's written there in the tax code for people to use. So if you work a full-time job, you're not going to be a real estate professional. You got a better chance of seeing Jesus or getting struck by lightning. But if you work a full-time job and you buy a short-term rental, there's a couple things you can do to qualify. One thing you have to do is you have to manage it yourself. So you can't have a property manager. You can have a cleaner. You just have to make sure that you manage most of the operations, like the guest communication, setting up the property, monitoring the pricing, things like that. But it's got to be the number one thing to take advantage of. And especially, I was mentioning earlier about those 10% down secondary home loans. The bonus depreciation isn't as favorable anymore, and time will tell. There's talks about them going back to 100% pretty soon.
Hopefully.
But if that happens, I mean, we're going to see like right now we have a supply shortage in most of the country because people are just sitting on, especially primary homes, right? People are just sitting on low interest rate loans. In fact, I saw this stat on Twitter the other day. It said 90% of current mortgages are lower than the current interest rate right now.
That's great for the sub-2 investors.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but with 10% down secondary home loan, and you're in a high tax bracket, and they bring back 100% bonus depreciation, we had clients that were saving more in taxes in the first year than their down payment on a house, because they were putting $100K down on a $500,000 property. The $500,000 property was giving them $180,000 to $200,000 of depreciation. That was offsetting their 45% tax bill, and they were literally if not all of it, they were getting 70 to 80% of their down payment funded by the government when it was at 100%. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And of course, I mean, it all varies when it comes to real estate. I mean, some property types have more bonus appreciation than others, right? So, but 100% of minus the land value, it's always going to be a good savings that you make. So
there's areas that are more favorable than others, right? So, and I've done trainings on this before, but you really got to watch out areas that border water, like a Florida, like a Destin, a 30A, a Miami, because the land's going to be worth a ton there. Gulf Shores, California. So what you can actually do is go on the county assessor website and check the property tax card, and that'll show you the breakout between. It'll just say like land or improvement, or like building and land, and then that way you'll know before you buy like how much tax benefits you're actually going to get. One of the things, if you want to buy houses in those highly land areas, potentially look at condos or townhomes, because when you own a condo or a townhome, you don't actually, in most cases, own the land that it's sitting on, and therefore you'll get the same amount of tax benefits. I had a client who bought $1 million property in Smokies, and Smokies is notorious for having super low land. So she saved like $100,000, more than $100,000, probably like $150,000 one year by buying $1 million property, right? That the next year she bought $1 million property in Gulf Shores, and she only saved $30,000 in taxes, and she was upset, right? Well, it's because the land in Gulf Shores is 40%,
right,
if not more. So you just have to be careful about where you buy is pretty important for tax purposes.
Okay. Yep. Awesome. I didn't know you can do bonus depreciation on a condo.
You can.
Townhome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Obviously they're not good for appreciation as much as like a single family home, and you also got to watch out for the HOAs and the bylaws, especially because they're short-term rentals. The HOAs get pissed off a lot, but condos and townhomes are amazing for depreciation purposes.
Amazing. Cool. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about your personal brand journey, your journey into becoming, a personal brand creator, influencer. How was that? Like, how was your journey? Like, what kind of motivated you to do so, and how has it been getting here?
I think in 10 years, the only two business models that are going to exist are AI and a personal brand. You're either going to start up a tech or a software company or some business that's going to be ran off the back of AI, but then people are going to get frustrated and upset with that. I mean, how many times when you call do you get somebody from America that picks up the phone? Mm-hmm. It's not super common anymore. People are either going to be buying into that system, which is AI, or they're going to be buying into people they know, like, and trust, which is personal brand. And that's why I think I'm able to charge more than the average CPA, is because they're not just paying for somebody to do their tax return. They're paying for Ryan to do their tax return. And when you have that personal brand surrounded by you, it just helps everything become a lot more easier. Now, there's steps in order to building a strong personal brand, and I have these 3 steps. I mean, step number 1 is you have to become the person of interest at whatever it is that you do. So it doesn't matter what it is. That's why you see when people become realtors for the first time, they always post on Facebook, they message all their friends and family. But you have to let everybody know exactly what it is that you do. My name is Ryan. I'm a real estate investor. I'm a CPA. I help real estate investors save money on taxes. Like, you have to just continuously remind the entire world what it is that you do, and you have to become a person of interest at it. So when I first got started, I would just join these Facebook groups of real estate investors. I would set a timer on my phone for 20 minutes, and I would sit there and I would just respond to people's questions, right? Give value. I would never pitch. I would just respond to people's questions, provide value. And it got to the point where people were commenting and tagging people like, oh, I don't know the answer, but this guy Ryan does. You should reach out to him. And it just blew up. And that's where I started my Facebook group. I started pulling people out of the other Facebook groups into my group because of that law of reciprocity. And the law of reciprocity says, if you give something, people are more likely to pay the return or almost feel like indebted to you, and they're going to repay the favor. So if you do that, if you give to infinity, you never have to take, because people are going to naturally want to work with you. And so that's why you're always like giving in public, but you're selling in private. And one of the biggest things I think is the email list, because if you give in public and you never ask, like, how are you making money? Well, behind closed doors, once you have their email, like they're gonna get marketed to. They're gonna get a series of emails. They're going to get, quote unquote pitched, because it goes back into the 7-11-4 principle. Like, in order for somebody to spend money with you, studies show that they need to spend 7 hours of watching your content. 7 hours. There needs to be 11 different call to actions, and it needs to be across 4 different platforms. So it's not enough to just be on one platform nowadays. It's omni-channel marketing. It's why you see, you see a newspaper ad for a Cadillac, you see a TV commercial, a billboard, and then you see somebody driving a Cadillac, and you're like, I want that thing. Well, it's omni-channel marketing. That's why when you go on Amazon, you look at something, you don't buy it. Next thing you know, it's showing up in your Facebook sponsored. You're seeing it in more and more places. And so it's super important. So become a person of interest, master the law of reciprocity. And then number 3, which is one of my personal favorites, is you have to learn how to transfer and receive authority in your space. So as a tide goes up, all the ships rise. The rising tide raises all boats. So if you and I are partnered together, you and I are promoting each other's brand, as your brand grows, so does mine, because the tide raises all people. And the authority, like people in real estate talk about OPM, other people's money. Nobody ever talks about OPA, other people's authority.
Other people's audience. Oh, okay.
Yeah, other people's. You have to think. So think about this, though. I would rather have 3 really good people who have strong authority with their brand. Like if they tell somebody to jump off, they don't even ask a question. They just do it, right? They don't ask how high, when. They just do it. I would rather partner with people who have that authority with their audience than just eyeballs and attention. Like, give me 3 of those people who have like clear conviction with their audience than 10 influencers that might have 10 times the followers than they do. Because if these people's followers don't have conviction in their message, and they don't, the people I'm partnering with don't have authority with their audience, they're not going to do anything. Those are the referrals that we get that never buy. Because the person that sent them to us, he or she didn't have enough authority with them. So when I go on somebody's podcast that has an extreme amount of authority in their space, I know I'm going to get good leads that are qualified, that are likely to sign up because of the person who referred them. But it works both ways. I have to also give my authority to you, and I have to promote you and say like why you have the #1 Facebook group for real estate investors, right? And that's not by accident. So just as like I receive authority, I also have to be able to promote it and transfer it as well.
Okay. And the authority building is just by giving, right? That's how you build authority.
Authority building, I think it's in a couple of different ways. It obviously accolades, right? Accolades is a big thing. Like, what have you accomplished? It obviously kind of sets the bar. Whenever you look at, if you go look at like TED Talks or some of the best speeches ever, a lot of them always start off with authority building or like credibility setting. That's just like, that's why a lot of times when you talk to real estate investors, people want to know like how many doors do you have, or like how many deals have you done, because it sets that authority and that experience, right? So I think it's accolades, like what you what have you accomplished? So it's accolades, it's giving. Accolades, giving. I think it's a lot of storytelling. Like people want to work with those who they feel they have a relationship with. And they also want to work with people who can prove that they've been there before. And so when I talk about where I started, so I always talk about where I started, where I talk about the relationships that I've had with my parents, because people can relate to that a lot better. And the better you can tell stories, the more money you'll make. If you can master storytelling and that art, because what stories do is they turn off the no part of their brain for a long enough time to where you can actually sell somebody something. Because we're born, our prefrontal cortex, the part that's not fully developed till we're 26 or 27, it's trained to say no. That's the no brain. The part of the brain that actually makes a decision is in the back. And you have to turn off this part of the brain before you can get to that. And one of the good ways to do that is through a story. And so it could be your personal story. It can be somebody else's story. You're obviously not stealing stories, but people can really relate to something through a story. And so if you want to prove something, you tell facts. If you want to sell something, you tell a story. So accolades, we talk about accolades, giving, stories. And then I think there's an element of persuasion, which is a powerful word. And I think it kind of gets like misconstrued. When you talk about like hypnosis or persuasion, people get a negative connotation to it. But I always say in a negative connotation, it's called a cult. In a positive connotation, it's called a community. Because if you can do these 5 things really well with your audience, you'll have them forever. And hopefully they don't listen to this part of the podcast. So then you'll never know that they won't know that you're doing it on them. But you have to do these 5 things in order to build a really good audience. The first thing you have to do is you have to support their dreams. Okay? I want to help real estate investors achieve financial freedom by saving money on taxes. I want to do this in order to blank, whatever your dream outcome is. Like, you have to tell people, I support your dreams. Whatever it is that you're doing, like, I support you leaving your W-2 job and investing in real estate full time. I support you, because remember, they don't have people to tell them that. They have family members telling them, what if the toilet goes out? What if the tenant, what if somebody doesn't show up? What if it doesn't work out? Nobody's there to tell you what if it was better than you ever imagined, right? And so we, as community leaders, have to be the people that tell our community that, like, what if it could be better than you ever imagined? We have to support their dreams. Number 2, we have to allay their fears. Everything's going to be okay. Look, I started off this same way. I bought a duplex. I lived on one side, rented out the other. You're going to be A-okay. I was only making 50 grand, 60 grand a year. Everything's going to be okay. So we have to support their dreams, allay their fears. We have to justify their previous failures. Look, it's not your fault you didn't learn how to buy real estate in school. In fact, the school system didn't want to teach you that. You see, in 1905, when John Rockefeller funded the Board of Education, the reason why he put a school bell in there was not to tell you when to show up to class and when not. It's to train you that when you were a factory worker, you would listen for that bell to know when to show up to work and to know when to leave for lunch and leave for the day. And Rockefeller was quoted by saying, I wasn't here to create a nation of thinkers. I'm here to create a nation of workers. And so it's no wonder that you weren't taught this in school, because they didn't teach you to be an entrepreneur and be independent. They taught you to be dependent upon the government. So you kept paying Social Security, you kept paying federal income tax, and you kept putting money into 401ks and things like that, right? So support their dreams, support their dreams, allay their fears, justify their previous failures. You got to confirm their suspicions. People have suspicions about their life that are out there that all we have to do is just confirm. Hell yeah, you're paying more in taxes. You want to know why you're paying a lot of money in taxes? Because you live in California, and most people in California have an effective tax rate of 45%. So all we have to do is just confirm what they're already believing in their head. Okay? People are joining the call or joining the program or joining something with a common belief that they have. We just have to confirm it for them. Yeah. And then the last thing we have to do is we have to throw rocks at their enemies, right? So the enemy of the enemy is my friend. So we have to unite our audience against a common enemy. So mine is corporate America, the IRS, sometimes banks. You unite your audience against a common enemy, and you put them all together, and it's a persuasion playbook. And it's been used by some of the greatest leaders, for better or for worse, in history, right? So where have you heard this before, right? We're going to make America great again. So that's support their dreams, right? Yeah. Allay their fears. Fuck it, we'll just build a wall. We'll keep them out. Don't worry about it, right? Everything's going to be okay, right? Justify their previous failures. Oh, it's not your fault. The Democrats and the crooked politicians and Hillary and all this and all, confirm their suspicions, like they're eating dogs and cats or whatever he said on the debate. Not that I'm political one way or another, but this type of stuff that I'm teaching has been used by people to persuade and influence other people. And the sooner that you learn it, the sooner you can't unlearn it. And then you either have to decide if you want to use it for good or if you just want to know enough so where it's not used against you.
So where do you learn this stuff? Last question. What are your sources of information? What are you training yourself on? You know?
A lot of these are the masterminds, man. The masterminds with other online marketers, storytellers, people who've done over $1 billion in online sales. They've studied persuasion. They've already read the books. They've already sought that out. So a lot of what I know is through osmosis of just being around these other people. People that are bigger and better than me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool, man. So I think this wraps up the podcast here. Now at the end here, what would you like the audience to take away from this podcast? At the end.
Figure out whose shoulders you can stand on. There's people, and maybe you have to pay to stand on their shoulders, but you'll get there a lot quicker than if you don't. Because Warren Buffett says you can make mistakes one of two ways. Either you make them on your own, which is costly, painful, timely, or you can go pay somebody else, pay a mentor to learn those for him. Warren Buffett, he hated public speaking. Warren Buffett spent $1,000 on Dale Carnegie's public speaking class. It was an in-person one-day event. He spent $1,000 in like 1940 something to listen to Dale Carnegie speak. He said it's the best $1,000 he's ever spent. He says it's more valuable than his degree at Wharton or wherever he went. Dale Carnegie wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, by the way.
Yeah.
So whose shoulders can you stand on, whether they're paid or unpaid? And then I would also say, don't wait to invest and wait. Because your opportunity cost of sitting on the sidelines is the opportunity that you lost by not being in the game. And remember, the people that stay in the game the longest make the most amount of money.
Yeah. Okay, I love it. Ryan, where can we find you? What's your @ You also have a show, right? And you have a Facebook group. So if you plug them all in here so we can all get that information.
Yeah, it's on all social medias. It's just at Ryan Bakke CPA, just like here in the video. On Facebook, it's Tax Strategies for Real Estate Investors with Ryan Bakke CPA. And then the podcast is just The Ryan Bakke Show.
Okay, amazing. All right, Ryan,
Yeah.
well, this wraps it up, and thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome.
We'll hope we have you on in the future.
Thank you so much.